Hello and good evening. This video tutorial is going to be on the redistribution of EIGRP routes using the EIGRP named mode, specifically the 64-bit EIGRP named mode, which is what named mode is, as opposed to the classic EIGRP mode, which was 32-bit. And we're going to take a look at redistribution, specifically an issue that comes into play when you're redistributing routes, and you just simply, when you do your redistribution for your K values, you push your metrics in as all ones or 5 ones. I was watching recently an IP expert video by Marco, amazing video, much longer than this one's going to be, which was an introduction to EIGRP name mode. And during that video, Marco ran into some interesting behavior where he attempted to redistribute a loopback address from a non-EIGRP named mode router to one that was the 64-bit named mode. And what was interesting was the route didn't show up. And so Marco had to do a little investigation and a little digging. Ultimately, he changed the bandwidth value to 1500. So he changed it from all ones, so 11111, to 1500 1111. And then moved on, because obviously it wasn't, the video wasn't really a troubleshooting video. Once he had solved it, he wanted to move on. He had other things to cover. So I just wanted to pick up here from where Marco had ran into the issue, specifically to talk about why the route didn't show up and why you have to change that bandwidth setting. And so I've got, these are Cisco 1841 routers that you see here. Right, so this guy is just a Cisco 1841, and this guy is a Cisco 1841, and this one is running 15.3 code, and this is going to be our named mode here. So we're going to make him the named mode, and this is just running the 12.4. And I'm also going to show you how to check to see if your router supports the 64-bit or the named mode for EIGRP, and I'm even going to show you how to turn it off on routers where it is supported. So if you don't want that 64-bit in those wide metrics, what you can do is you can actually turn it off, and it's a hidden command. The command you probably won't find in documentation. You certainly won't find it at the command line, but we'll take a look at that in a second. So again, this 12.4 24T, this is just going to be our classic mode, right? So I'll just put down here classic mode. And sometimes classic mode is referred to as numbered mode, where you can put in, you know, router EIGRP 1 or router EIGRP 35 or router EIGRP whatever the number is going to be for your autonomous system. And so we'll look at the different ways to do this. So let's go ahead, let's jump in here. I'm going to come back over here, and we're going to set up the classic mode router first, which is going to be router 5. So we'll go from user exec to privilege exec into global config, and what I'm going to do right now is I'm simply going to say interface FA00. We're going to give it the IP address that you see there on the screen, so 10.56, whoops, IP address 10.56.56.5, and we'll just make this a class C subnet mask on a class A address, and we're going to do a no shut, and we'll bring that interface up. So let me also go ahead and configure these loopback interfaces. So interface loopback 10 is just going to be IP address 5.5.10.5, and it's class C. And let me see, we had IPT. Let me make this quick correction here. So interface, or IP address, I apologize. Let's say Control A, or yep, get back to the beginning. So IP address, there we go. And oops, we got bumped out there. So interface loopback 10, IP address 5.5.10.5. See if we can get this in here. All right, there we go. Interface loopback 11. is going to be IP address 5.5.11.5, still with a Class C subnet mask. And so we'll just put those two on there. We don't need to add in the third one there, the 5.5.12. We have enough with what we've got right now. All right, so let's go ahead and again, Marco had one side set up with classic mode, and that's going to be our router 5. Let me go ahead and get the host name on here so we can see that we're on router 5. So I'm going to go ahead and say router EIGRP 56. And again, if I exit back one level, if I type in router EIGRP, you can see when I do the question mark, it's just only giving me the option for the autonomous system because the version of code which I'm running does not support the name mode. So the 12.4.24T8 code on the 1841 doesn't have support for the name mode. So how could we check? Let's say maybe I wanted to check to see, does my distribution have support for that? I could simply type in show EIGRP plugins, do show EIGRP plugins, and as you can see, it doesn't give me any information here other than the IGRP2 version, IPv4, but on router 6, where we do have support for that, if I do a show EIGRP plugins, let's see what it looks like. As you can see here, much more verbose output. In fact, the EIGRP release, this is what we're looking for. If it's 8.0 or later, it should support name mode, but we can also do another check. If you do a show IP protocols, oh, actually I forgot, we're not running EIGRP there yet, so let's come back over here, do show IP protocols, and it's going to show us that for the metric values, there's not a sixth metric, a K6. If you were to see a K6 here, and then there's another line which accompanies it, that'll say that it's 64-bit, then you would have the capabilities of doing that. And I'll run these commands again on R6 when we get there to set the configuration up. So let's go ahead and finish this up. So router EIGRP 56, and we're going to go ahead and put in our no auto summary. We're going to put in the EIGRP router ID. We'll just set it to 5.5.5.5. And let's go ahead, we'll put a network statement in here. And so remember, when you are configuring EIGRP, that the network statement is going to advertise the network we're getting ready to advertise. We're going to do 5.5.10.0. And what's going to happen is this is going to be set up as an internal EIGRP route. So the administrative distance should be 90 as opposed to an external. So when we redistribute addresses within EIGRP, those EIGRP addresses will show up as externals with an AD administrative distance of 170. And so we'll see that here in a second. Right, and so then I'm going to also do a network statement, and let's go ahead and start the EIGRP process on our interface that is facing R6. All right, so if I do a do show run section EIGRP, you can see there are the routes. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a quick route map, very similar to what you saw Marco do. That's going to go ahead and we're going to redistribute the 5.5.11 network. So I'm just going to say route map 5.5 to R6. And I am going to match on interface loopback 11, right? And that's all we need to do there. So then we'll go back into the router EIGRP 56, and I'm going to say redistribute connected, and then we're going to use our route map that we just used, because remember that loopback address is seen as a connected address. And so out of all the loopbacks that are in there, my route map is just only going to match on loopback 11. So what was the name of my route map? So we'll just say 5.5. I should have probably done 5.5.11. So we'll just say 5.5 to R6, right? Because that's who we're going to redistribute this guy to, because that is the only adjacency we're going to be bringing up. All right, so now if I do a do show run on the section EIGRP, okay, so good. You can see there that we're set up. We're redistributing the 5.5.11 loopback, but we've got the advertisement for the 5.5.10 is being done with the network statement. So two ways that we can share out some of these routes here. All right, so now let's jump over to R6. And R6 is running, and let me get the host name in here real quick. So R6 is running the 15.3 branch of code. So let's rerun those commands to check to see. So do show IP protocol, protocols is 1. And we're not running EIGRP yet, so let's get that set up. So first let me go on to the interface here. So we'll say interface FA00. I'm going to say IP address 10.56.56.6, 255.0, and we're going to say no shut. And so what we want to do now is let's test our connectivity. So do ping 10.56.56.5. Can I ping across? It should ARP out, and then it works. All right, fantastic. So let's go ahead and do our name mode configuration. So if I were to say router EIGRP, and actually let me back out one level here. So if I say router EIGRP with a question mark here, you can see that not only do we have the autonomous system or the numbered, quote unquote, numbered or classical EIGRP setup, we also have the EIGRP virtual instance name where it's asking us for a word. And so this is our named mode. So I'm just going to call this CCIE, right? And so under here, you can see we've got the address families, we've got a shutdown command, default, exit, and no. So we want to go into the address family to get this configured up. So it's going to be IPv4 unicast. And now here, this is also a little shortcut. So I could type A and hit the tab key for auto completion, and that'll give me the autonomous system. But it's interesting, if you type AS, right, you'll notice that that command isn't there. There is no command that starts with AS. However, this is a hidden way to simply quickly type in the autonomous system number, and we'll say 56. So now this has taken us down into IPv4 unicast configuration mode for autonomous system 56. So we've got some other commands that are now down at this level. So if I were to type an EIGRP question mark, I could put in my router ID. So let's say 6.6.6.6. And now we want to go ahead and configure. We're going to do a network statement, and we'll do the same thing that we did over on router 5. So I'm going to do a network statement for 6.6.10.0, and we're going to say 0.0.0.255, right? So that's going to show up as an internal EIGRP route. And I'm also going to do a route map on this side to send over a route, the network 6611 over to router 5. So before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and go into AF interface, right, for FA00, and I'm going to go ahead and do a question mark here so you can see some of the commands that you have, right? You can do passive interface under the specific interface mode. You can do a default for the AF interface command, summary address on the interface, and so I'm specifically right now under interface FA00. So let me exit out one level up. We'll do the question mark, and we're going to do the network command for the 10.56.56.0. And now when I hit enter here, what we should see is an adjacency should come up, and there it is, between router 5 and router 6. And so now we've got an adjacency up between the two routers. So if I do the question mark here, you can see that I'm in the address family configuration mode. And so where would we do the redistribution? You'll notice again, just very similar to Marco's video, there is no redistribution here. So it's under topology base, right? So if I go under topology base, this is where I would see my redistribute command. And then here it is right here to redistribute IPv4 routes. So before we do that, let me go ahead and type a do show IP route right now. So as you can see, we see the two addresses that have been advertised out from router 5. We see 5510, and we see as an internal, because this is the one, whoops, apologize for that. So the 5510 is the route that we advertised out with a network statement. So that route is going to show up as an internal EIGRP route. And then we did the redistribution command with the 5511. right? So now that EIGRP is running, if I do a do show IP protocols, you can see here, and let me scale up a little bit. So this is what we were talking about here. You can see that the metric version under the routing protocol, it shows that it is 64-bit, right? And there is a K6 value here, and this is going to be for future use, right? There is no value set for this right now, and it's not being used right now within Cisco EIGRP, but it is there for future use with the 64-bit version of EIGRP, which is, again, named mode. So that's one way to see. The other one was if we took a look at the plugins, right? So if I do a do show EIGRP plugins, you can see there is the 12.0 version. And then finally, if I do a do show EIGRP, and I believe it is tech support. Let's see, yeah, tech support. And tech support, it also gives you very similar output. But again, it shows you that we have a version here, EIGRP release, that is above 8.0, and then a whole bunch of other information that follows here, right? But right away at the very top, you can see that. And here you go, metric version 64-bit. So if I were to run that same command again and then say include metric ver, then it would show us right there that it's 64 bits. All right, so let's get back to do show IP route. Right, so here is the routing table as it stands right now. Let's come over to router 5, do show IP route. Right, and we haven't picked up any of the, and in fact, I don't believe we've actually set up the loopbacks on R6 yet. So let's get the loopback addresses taken care of here. So interface loopback 10, it's going to be IP address 6.6.10.6. And then interface loopback 11 is going to be IP address 6.6.11.6. All right, so we've got those guys set up. So I'm going to go ahead and on router 6, so I think we've already got that. So let's do a do show run section EIGRP. And yep, we are advertising it out with a network statement. Let me go ahead and do a route map, just like we did on our side here. And so we'll say that this is going to be, I'll do 6.6.11 to R5 is going to be the name of my route map. And I'm just going to simply match on interface loopback 11. So that's it for our route map. So now we have to redistribute. So how do we do that with the EIGRP named mode? So again, I go router EIGRP CCIE, CCIE, and we're going to go into address family IPv4 unicast for autonomous system 56. And if I do a question mark, you can see that, again, there is no redistribution statement at this level, at the address family configuration mode level that we're in. Let's jump into the topology base. Topology base. And if I do a question mark here, there's our redistribute command. So we'll redistribute from here. So I'll redistribute connected with the route map of 6.6.11 going over to R5, right? Excuse me. Okay, so when I redistributed here, you'll notice that I just simply said redistribute connected with the route map and didn't put in any metric values. So on R6, when I do a do show IP route, we get the metric shows up. But oftentimes, when you redistribute with EIGRP, if I were to type in redistribute, or let's say no, and we'll drop this guy out, because we wanted to see that it worked initially. So I'll say copy and paste. So if I were to say redistribute connected route map and then do a question mark, you can see it wants the route map entry, so 5.5 over to R6, but then what can we add on here? I can add in metrics. And so this is where Marco typed in 1.11111. So basically just 5 ones. And this is, again, very common practice. There's nothing wrong with this. So if I go over to R6, before I hit enter, we should not see the route because I removed the redistribute statement, and we don't. The 5511 is no longer there. So now let me enter the redistribute statement in with the metric set the way that it's typically done with a 32-bit classic EIGRP mode. So with that metric 11111, right? So now if I come over to R6 and I do a do show IP route, we're not going to see that route at this point. But on R6, do we see it in the topology table? So if I were to type do show run and, or not do show run, do show IP EIGRP topology table for 5.5.11.0/24, let's see what we see. And so this is actually why Marco did not see the route. He went from a classic mode, from a 32-bit mode, redistributed the route into a 64-bit EIGRP named mode router that took the route in, and this is the problem right here. So when you look to see what the feasible distance is in the EIGRP topology table, with the 64-bit values, if you use all ones on the 32-bit side and send those in, with the wide metrics, it's no longer looking at it with a maximum speed, I believe, of 10 gigabits per second. EIGRP is actually looking at it in relation to an interface that's 655 terabits per second. So by putting the 1 in there, I'm basically saying that the interface metric would be equivalent to 1 kilobit a second being compared to, in order to calculate the feasible distance and then to come up with the entry that's going to be placed into the routing table or the RIB. What would happen is you then end up with this feasible distance at infinity, right? And so infinity is not good. This is not a good thing, and this is why we don't see the route. You can see here that this blew out to a 32-bit, that maximum for a 32-bit number, right? That 4.294 billion, right? So what happens is on the named mode side, we see it as infinity. And so this is why when Marco did the redistribution, the route did not show up. So how did he fix it? Remember that what he did was he ended up pulling it back and then redistributing it again, and he put 1500 in here, right? So as soon as I put that in there, let's come back over here and let's see, what does the EIGRP topology table show now? There's my feasible distance, right? And here is the value that's going to be entered into the RIB, or the routing table. So if I do a do show IP route, we're going to see that same value right after our administrative distance, which we do. So here's the 5511. Again, remember, we've redistributed it, so it shows up as an EIGRP external with an administrative distance of 170 and the feasible distance of 3469653, which is right here. In fact, what's interesting is this is the only way to get the metric not to show up is by using all ones. If you were to change this, let me do Control A and I'll say no. If I was to change it, and the only change I made was to change it to 2, saying 2 kilobits a second for that bandwidth value, or I should say the throughput value on the wide metrics, right? It's no longer bandwidth delay. They now are referred to as throughput and latency with the 64-bit version, the named mode version. So if I were to change it to 2, that is actually enough to still allow me to have that route pulled in. However, you can see we end up with this ridiculously large feasible distance number and an almost as ridiculously large number for the RIB entry for the feasible distance, right? I mean, this is a huge number here. So we're dealing with really wide metrics, right? These 64-bit metrics. Now, that's one way that it could be fixed. So let me show you, and this is a hidden command that you're not going to find in the documentation. You're certainly not going to find it on the command line, and I'll show you that. But let's go back here. I'm going to say no. So we're going to break it, right? So I'm going to break it here. I'm going to redistribute it out with all ones. So there we go, that redistribute connected route map with all ones. I'll come back over to router 6. We should see that it's back at infinity, and we do. So that's the reason that this is not going to be inserted into the routing table, right? We see it in the topology table, as is evidenced by this command, the output from the command, but it's not in the routing table because, again, the feasible distance EIGRP named mode, 64-bit mode, sees this as infinity, so it's not going to install it in the rib. So how could we fix this? So this is the command. It's a hidden command, and if you go to, and I want to say it's going to be, yep, there it is, metric. So again, where am I at right now? So if I were to type end, I'm from privilege exec into global config. From global config, I'm going to type in router EIGRP CCIE. So we're going to get into name mode. I'm going to type address family IPv4 unicast autonomous system 56. And so that's the level that I'm at right there. And the command that we're looking for is this command right here, metric. Modify metrics and parameters for address advertisement. And what we can do with this command is I can actually turn 64-bit mode off. So let's see how to do that. Again, it's a hidden command, so it does not show up here. So if I said metric version and then 32-bit, what I'm doing is I'm telling router 6, I no longer want you to run 64-bit mode. I want you to fall back, and all of your metric calculations are going to be done using 32-bit mode. Now watch what happens, and this is something that I would not do during the middle of the workday, as that could be a resume generating event. But what's going to happen is, there we go. So we've got the neighbor change, right? There was a resync, and so now let's see what happens with the do show IP EIGRP topology for that redistributed network. And as you can see, the feasible distance is set to 256.0.0.0.2816, so it's no longer seen as infinity. If I type do show IP route, the route still shows up here, right? Or I should say it now shows back up here, and there is the feasible distance along with the same administrative distance. And now with 32-bit mode, this works, and it works great. So let's take a look at those other commands. How about do show IP protocols? What do we see now? Do we see a metric version? You can see we still see the K6, right? However, we are using the 32-bit version of the metrics now. So the calculation will now be done using the 32-bit version of the metrics. So one way to fix it, and probably the preferred way, is to simply change the throughput, or I should say on the classic side, the bandwidth setting to 1500 to anything other than 1 is going to resolve the issue. But if you're in a migration scenario of some kind, this hidden command may come in handy. So if I do a do show run section EIGRP, you can see that the metric command shows up here. Now we're not stuck. Let's say that I decide, okay, I'm ready to move to the 64-bit mode. I would simply type in metric version 64-bit. And again, the metric version 64-bit, the metric version 32-bit, both of those commands are hidden, undocumented commands, right? And so again, there's going to be a resync that takes place here. R6 is going to have to recalculate all of the metrics that it would have. We're going to get a message here any second now telling us that that is complete. There we go. So the diffusing update algorithm is giving us a neighbor change notification. So if I type do show IP route now, as you would expect, again, it's calculating with 64-bit metrics on this side. That route no longer shows up. So if I do the do show IP protocols, we should now see that we are back to the 64-bit metrics. If I do the do show IP EIGRP topology for that network, there we go. The feasible distance is at infinity, and therefore, while it is in the topology table, it is not going to be placed into the rib or the routing table, because EIGRP thinks that the route is no good, that it's basically to infinity, right? All right, so again, Marco's video is impeccable, fantastic video, and I loved watching it. It got me thinking about why did that happen to him, and so I started to do a little digging, and this is what I found, and I just wanted to share this information with you out there. So, not a full-blown tutorial on EIGRP Named Mode. I'm thinking about doing one of those down the road, but this is definitely something I wanted to get an answer to as to why did Marco see the behavior that had exhibited itself on the router that was in classic mode when he did his route map and then did the redistribution statement with the all ones. It didn't work, and then it did work all of a sudden. And again, Marco it wasn't a troubleshooting video. As soon as he got it fixed, he moved on, which is exactly what I would have done. But I wanted to dig in to find out under the covers, what is EIGRP doing and how was it performing those calculations? And why did it not do it when it was set to 1? And so again, the big difference is with classic mode, it was bandwidth and delay. With EIGRP named mode, or the 64-bit mode with the EIGRP wide metrics, that bandwidth is now being calculated or compared to a maximum value of 655 terabits a second. So when you put a 1 in there, you're going to end up with this. If you're redistributing over to a 64-bit client, you're going to end up with this, right? And it's going to be that the route is no good. It gets in the topology table, but it will not be inserted into the RIB because EIGRP views it as a route to infinity, and so it is a bogus route. All right. Well, I hope that you've picked some stuff up that you didn't know from this video, and hopefully this is a good explanation as to why, when you're doing redistribution between 32-bit mode and 64-bit mode, why you may see some odd behavior when you're redistributing routes that have sort of the default K values that you typically redistribute with, or that you used to typically redistribute with, which is just the 5 ones. All right. Thanks for viewing. Have a great day. And Marco, please keep up the videos. Absolutely fantastic. Love the IP Expert videos. Have a great night.